the undefeated champion. In the grand arena of Corvash, a hush fell over the raucous crowd as Zara the undefeated stepped onto the battle platform. The Zethian warrior moved with fluid grace, her lean muscles rippling under crimson skin, twin hearts pounding out a steady rhythm in her chest. With a toss of her sable hair, she surveyed the gathered throng, basking in their adulation. No competitor had ever bested her. Oh, they had tried, the greatest champions from 100 worlds, the most vicious brawlers of a dozen species. But Zara had laid them all low, had broken their bodies and crushed their spirits. She was the queen of the arena, the undisputed master of single combat. Her people's innate gifts, enhanced strength, lightning reflexes, and preternatural balance, had been honed to a razor's edge by a lifetime of training and battle. As the current victor, Zara possessed the right to choose her next opponent. Eyes narrowing, she scanned the assembly, seeking a worthy foe. Her gaze skipped past the hulking Goliaths, the serpentine Naga, the insectoid Mantics. All had fallen before her, all had proven unworthy. But wait, there, standing apart from the horde. A human. Zara scoffed, lips curling into a sneer. The small bipeds were newcomers to the galactic stage, their homeworld only recently brought into the fold of the star-spanning Imperium. By all accounts they were a fractious and unpredictable species, technologically advanced yet strangely primitive in matters of culture and philosophy. What could this lone human possibly hope to achieve against her unmatched skill? The human stepped forward, shrugging off his grey cloak to reveal a tall, muscular frame. He was bald, with ebony skin and eyes that shone like polished onyx. Scars crisscrossed his bare chest and arms, speaking of a hard-fought life. He carried no visible weapons, but there was something in his bearing, in the coiled tension of his stance, that gave Zara pause. "I am Magnus," the human declared, his voice a deep, rumbling bass that carried across the arena. "I have come to challenge the undefeated." Zara tilted her head, momentarily intrigued. It had been some time since an opponent had faced her with such confidence. Still, he was only human. She would break him, as she had broken all the others. And perhaps his defeat would provide a moment's amusement to alleviate the tedium that came with invincibility. "I accept your challenge, human," Zara called out, crossing her arms over her chest. "Though I warn you, none have survived me in over 100 matches. You face your doom." Magnus only smiled, dropping into a ready crouch as the arena's energy shield shimmered into place around them. "We shall see." The match began with a thunderclap, the shockwave from their colliding bodies resonating through the arena. They traded blows in a whirlwind of strikes and counters, Zara's superior speed matched by Magnus' raw power. The crowd roared with each exchange, thrilled by the display of martial prowess. But as the fight wore on, Zara found herself growing increasingly frustrated. The human refused to follow the familiar patterns, refused to be goaded into the traps and feints that had felled so many before him. His style was unorthodox, a fluid blend of grappling and striking that flowed around her attacks like water. And his endurance was astounding, even with her enhanced Zethian physiology, Zara found herself beginning to tire. Magnus, by contrast, seemed to only grow stronger as the battle progressed. His onyx eyes gleamed with fierce joy, his scarred lips curled into a feral grin. He was pushing her, forcing her to dig deep into her reserves, to bring the full might of her skill to bear. With a snarl of rage, Zara launched into a blistering offensive, raining down a hurricane of blows that would have reduced a lesser opponent to a broken ruin. But incredibly, impossibly, Magnus weathered the assault. Battered and bleeding, the human warrior stood firm, absorbing the punishment with gritted teeth and an indomitable will. And then, in a burst of speed that left even Zara stunned, Magnus slipped inside her guard. His arms locked around her waist, his shoulder driving into her chest with pile-driver force. The air whooshed from Zara's lungs as she was slammed to the ground, the arena floor cracking beneath the impact. Dazed, disoriented, Zara struggled to rise. But Magnus was there, his strong hands pinning her wrists, his weight pressing her down. She strained against him with all her might, summoning every iota of her legendary strength. But it was not enough. For the first time in her career, the undefeated had been brought to the brink of defeat. The arena fell silent, 1,000 spectators holding their collective breath. Slowly, almost gently, Magnus leaned down until his face was inches from Zara's. Up close, she could see the latticework of scars that marbled his skin, could feel the heat radiating off his body. "Yield," he rumbled, his onyx eyes boring into hers. "Yield, and live to fight another day." Zara hesitated, her pride warring with the undeniable reality of her situation. Never before had she surrendered, never before had she tasted the bitterness of defeat. But there was something in Magnus' gaze, a respect and a challenge that stirred some deep place in her warrior's soul. "I yield," she rasped, the words like ashes on her tongue. "I yield, to you." Magnus released her and rose to his feet, towering over her prone form. He extended a hand, an unspoken offer. After a moment's hesitation, Zara reached out and clasped it, allowing herself to be pulled upright. The crowd erupted into chaos, some cheering Magnus' victory, others howling in outrage at the upset. But the two warriors ignored the din, their eyes locked on one another. In that moment, a strange understanding passed between them, a recognition of equals, of kindred spirits forged in the crucible of battle. Zara had been defeated, but she was far from broken. If anything, the loss had only stoked the fires of her determination. She would train harder, fight smarter, and one day reclaim her title as the undisputed champion. But that day, she knew, she would have to go through Magnus. The human had proven himself her equal, had earned her grudging respect. And deep down, in a place she dared not acknowledge, Zara found herself looking forward to their inevitable rematch. For the undefeated had finally found a worthy adversary. And the greatest battles were yet to come. An unexpected adversary. In the days following her startling defeat, Zara sequestered herself in her training chambers, replaying the fight with Magnus over and over in her mind. She analyzed every move, every counter, seeking to understand how the human had managed to overcome her vaunted skills. It was a vexing puzzle, one that consumed her waking thoughts and haunted her dreams. But even as she sought to unravel the mystery of Magnus' victory, Zara found herself grudgingly fascinated by the human warrior. He had displayed a level of skill and tenacity that she had never before encountered, had pushed her to her very limits and beyond. In a life defined by combat, by the endless pursuit of martial perfection, Magnus represented a new and exhilarating challenge. Zara redoubled her training efforts, pushing herself harder than ever before. She spent long hours in the practice ring, honing her techniques against the most advanced combat droids and the fiercest of her fellow Zethian warriors. She studied the fighting arts of a dozen worlds, seeking to incorporate their strengths and negate their weaknesses. All the while, word of Magnus' exploits continued to reach her ears. The human was carving a path through the arena's ranks, dispatching opponents with the same uncanny skill he had displayed against her. Some whispered that he was unbeatable, that he had been blessed by the gods of war. Others claimed that he was a demon in human form, an unstoppable force of destruction. Zara listened to the rumors with a mixture of irritation and anticipation. She knew that she would face Magnus again, that their paths were fated to cross in the arena once more. And when that day came, she would be ready. She would reclaim her title as the undefeated, would prove to the galaxy that no human could best a Zethian warrior. But even as she focused on her training, Zara found her thoughts turning increasingly to Magnus himself. What drove him? What motivated him to fight with such relentless ferocity? She had faced countless opponents over the years, had broken the wills of the most hardened warriors, but never before had she encountered someone quite like him. In quiet moments between bouts, Zara found herself studying recordings of Magnus' fights, analyzing his every move with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She marveled at the fluidity of his technique, the way he seemed to anticipate his opponent's actions before they even began. It was almost as if he possessed a sixth sense, an uncanny ability to read the flow of battle. As the days turned to weeks, Zara's fascination with Magnus grew. She began to see him not just as an opponent to be defeated, but as a kindred spirit, a warrior who lived and breathed the art of combat, who found joy and purpose in the clash of bodies and the testing of wills. In a strange way, she felt a connection to him, a sense of shared destiny that transcended the boundaries of species and culture. And so, when the day of their rematch finally arrived, Zara found herself filled not just with the burning desire for victory, but with a sense of anticipation, of eagerness to once again test herself against the only foe who had ever truly challenged her. As she stepped onto the arena floor, the roar of the crowd washing over her like a tidal wave, Zara's eyes locked onto Magnus' tall, imposing form. He stood across from her, his onyx eyes gleaming with that same fierce intensity she had come to know so well. "Zara the undefeated," Magnus called out, his deep voice carrying easily over the din of the spectators. "I have been waiting for this day." Zara felt her lips curl into a smile, a fierce, predatory grin that would have sent lesser opponents cowering in fear. "As have I, Magnus. As have I." The energy field shimmered into place around them, and the battle began in a whirlwind of motion. They clashed like titans, their bodies a blur of strikes and counters, feints and ripostes. The arena shook with the force of their blows, the very air seeming to tremble with the intensity of their struggle. But even as they fought, Zara found herself marveling at the sheer joy of it, the exhilaration of facing an opponent who pushed her to her very limits. Magnus was her equal in every way, a warrior who understood the true nature of combat, who reveled in the dance of life and death. Back and forth they went, trading blows with devastating force. Zara could feel the ache of fatigue beginning to set in, could taste the coppery tang of blood on her tongue. But she pushed through the pain, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't even known she possessed. In the end, it was a single, split-second mistake that decided the match. Zara overextended on a punch, leaving herself open for the briefest of moments. Magnus seized the opportunity, slipping inside her guard and sweeping her legs out from under her with a lightning-fast kick. Zara hit the ground hard, the breath driven from her lungs by the impact. She struggled to rise, but Magnus was there, his strong hands pinning her down, his weight pressing her into the dirt. "Yield," he growled, his face inches from hers. "Yield, and live to fight another day." Zara hesitated, her pride warring with the undeniable reality of her situation. She had lost, again, to this human warrior who had so thoroughly disrupted her world. But even in defeat, she found herself feeling a strange sense of satisfaction, of fulfillment. "I yield," she said, her voice steady and clear. "You have bested me once more, Magnus. But know this, I will not rest until I have reclaimed my title. We will meet again, in the arena or beyond." Magnus smiled, a fierce, feral grin that sent a shiver down Zara's spine. "I count on it, undefeated. I count on it." He released her then, rising to his feet and offering her a hand up. Zara took it, allowing herself to be pulled upright. And as she stood there, facing the warrior who had become her greatest rival, she felt a sense of anticipation, of excitement for the battles yet to come. For Zara knew now that her path was inextricably linked with Magnus, that their fates were bound together by the ties of combat and mutual respect. And though she had been defeated, she had never felt more alive, more filled with purpose. The undefeated had fallen. But like a phoenix from the ashes, she would rise again, stronger and more determined than ever before. And when she faced Magnus once more, it would be a battle for the ages, a clash of warriors that would echo through the annals of history. Zara smiled, a fierce, predatory grin. She could hardly wait. A warrior's resolve. In the aftermath of her second defeat at the hands of Magnus, Zara threw herself into her training with a renewed sense of purpose. She spent every waking moment in the practice ring, pushing her body and mind to their absolute limits. She studied the recordings of her fights with Magnus obsessively, breaking down every move, every technique, searching for any weakness she could exploit. But even as she focused on honing her skills, Zara found her thoughts increasingly occupied by the enigmatic human warrior. Magnus had shown her a level of respect and honor that she had rarely encountered in her years of fighting. He treated her not just as an opponent to be defeated, but as a fellow warrior, a kindred spirit who understood the true nature of combat. Zara began to seek out information about Magnus, trying to learn more about the man behind the fighter. She discovered that he was a renowned warrior among his own people, a champion who had risen from humble beginnings to become a legend in the arena. But there was little else to be found, Magnus' past shrouded in mystery and rumor. As the days turned to weeks, Zara found herself growing increasingly restless. The arena fights no longer held the same thrill, the same sense of challenge. She had tasted true competition in her battles with Magnus, had experienced the rush of facing an opponent who could push her to her very limits. Now, everything else seemed pale and insignificant by comparison. And so, when word reached her that Magnus had issued a challenge to any warrior brave enough to face him, Zara knew that she had to answer the call. She traveled to the neutral ground of the Corva space station, a massive construct that orbited the edge of the galaxy's spiral arm. There, in a specially constructed arena, the greatest warriors from 100 worlds gathered to witness the spectacle. Zara arrived to find Magnus already waiting for her, his tall form silhouetted against the starry backdrop of space. "Zara," he said, his deep voice sending a shiver down her spine. "I knew you would come." Zara stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "I could not resist the chance to face you again, Magnus. To test myself against the only warrior who has ever truly challenged me." Magnus smiled, a fierce, feral grin that set Zara's blood on fire. "Then let us begin." The fight that followed was a thing of legend, a battle that would be spoken of for generations to come. Zara and Magnus clashed like forces of nature, their bodies a blur of movement, their strikes and counters carried out with lightning speed and devastating precision. Back and forth they went, trading blows that would have felled lesser opponents. The arena shook with the force of their struggle, the very fabric of space seeming to tremble with the intensity of their combat. But even as they fought, Zara found herself marveling at the sheer beauty of it, the perfect harmony of two warriors pushing each other to the very limits of their abilities. In Magnus, she had found not just a rival, but an equal, someone who understood the true nature of the warrior's path. In the end, it was Magnus who emerged victorious, his final strike slipping past Zara's guard to send her crashing to the ground. But even in defeat, Zara felt a sense of satisfaction, of fulfillment. She had given everything she had pushed herself beyond what she had ever thought possible. And in doing so, she had found a new sense of purpose, a new reason to fight. As Magnus helped her to her feet, his strong hand clasping hers, Zara knew that their paths were now inextricably linked. They were more than just rivals, more than just opponents. They were kindred spirits, warriors who had found in each other a reflection of their own unbreakable will. "You fought well, Zara," Magnus said, his voice filled with respect. "I am honored to have faced you." Zara nodded, her eyes locked on his. "As am I, Magnus. As am I." And as they stood there, surrounded by the cheers of the crowd and the endless expanse of space, Zara knew that this was only the beginning. She would continue to train, to push herself to new heights. And when she faced Magnus again, as she knew she would, it would be a battle that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. For Zara was a warrior, and the warrior's path was one of endless challenge, of constant striving for perfection. And in Magnus, she had found the ultimate test, the ultimate motivation to become the greatest version of herself. She smiled, a fierce, determined grin. The future stretched out before her, filled with the promise of battles yet to come. And Zara knew that she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, ready to prove herself worthy of the title of undefeated once more. But this time, she would not fight for glory, or for the adulation of the crowd. This time, she would fight for something greater, something more profound. She would fight for the chance to stand once more with Magnus, to test herself against the only warrior who had ever truly understood her. And in that fight, Zara knew, she would find the true meaning of what it meant to be a warrior, to live a life dedicated to the pursuit of excellence, to the never-ending quest for self-discovery and self-mastery. She took a deep breath, feeling the fire of determination burning in her veins. The path ahead would be long and arduous, filled with trials and challenges beyond anything she had ever faced before. But Zara was ready. She was a warrior, and the warrior's path was her destiny. And with Magnus by her side, she knew that there was no obstacle she could not overcome, no foe she could not vanquish. The undefeated had fallen. But like the phoenix of legend, she would rise again, stronger and more powerful than ever before. And when she did, the galaxy would tremble before her might, and the name of Zara would be spoken with reverence and awe for generations to come. The rematch. The anticipation was electric as Zara and Magnus faced each other across the arena floor, the roar of the crowd a distant echo in their ears. This was the moment they had both been waiting for, the chance to test themselves against the only opponent who had ever truly challenged them. Zara could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her blood singing with the thrill of impending battle. She had trained relentlessly for this moment, had pushed herself beyond the limits of what she had thought possible. And now, as she stared into Magnus' fierce, determined eyes, she knew that all of her hard work, all of her sacrifice, had been leading to this singular point in time. Magnus, for his part, looked as focused and intense as ever. His tall, muscular frame was coiled with tension, his every movement speaking of a barely contained power. He had become a legend in his own right, a warrior whose name was spoken with reverence and awe across the galaxy. But Zara knew that she was his equal, that she possessed the same unbreakable will, the same indomitable spirit. And as the energy field shimmered into place around them, she felt a sense of calm descend over her, a perfect clarity of purpose that banished all doubt and fear. The fight began in a blur of motion, Zara and Magnus coming together in a whirlwind of strikes and counters. They moved with a speed and precision that defied belief, their bodies seeming to blur as they flowed around each other in a deadly dance. But even as they fought, Zara could sense that something was different. Magnus' style had evolved, had become even more unpredictable and fluid than before. He seemed to anticipate her every move, to counter her attacks before she had even begun to execute them. Zara gritted her teeth, pushing herself harder, faster. She drew upon every ounce of her training, every scrap of her experience, searching for a way to break through Magnus' defenses. But he was like a force of nature, his every movement perfectly calibrated, his every strike delivered with devastating precision. Back and forth they went, trading blows that would have felled lesser warriors. The arena shook with the force of their struggle, the very air crackling with the intensity of their combat. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide with awe and disbelief. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch out into eternity, Magnus saw his opening. With a burst of speed that defied comprehension, he slipped inside Zara's guard, his hands locking around her wrists, his body pressing her back against the arena wall. Zara struggled against his grip, her muscles straining with the effort. But Magnus held her fast, his onyx eyes boring into hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "Yield," he growled, his voice low and fierce. "Yield, and acknowledge me as your equal." Zara hesitated, her pride warring with the undeniable reality of her situation. She had never before surrendered, had never before acknowledged anyone as her equal. But as she stared into Magnus' eyes, she saw something there that gave her pause, a flicker of understanding, of respect. "I yield," she said, her voice steady and clear. "You have bested me, Magnus. And in doing so, you have earned my respect, and my acknowledgement." Magnus released her then, stepping back with a nod of his head. And as Zara stood there, rubbing her wrists where his hands had gripped her, she felt a strange sense of peace descend over her, a feeling of rightness that she had never before experienced. "We are equals, you and I," Magnus said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "Two warriors, bound by the code of honor, dedicated to the pursuit of excellence. Zara nodded, a slow smile spreading across her face. Yes, she said. Yes, we are. And as they stood there, surrounded by the shattered remnants of the arena and the stunned silence of the crowd, Zara knew that her life had been forever changed. She had met her match in Magnus, had found in him a kindred spirit, a warrior who understood the true nature of the path they had chosen. Their rivalry would continue, she knew. They would face each other again and again, pushing each other to new heights of skill and power. But it would be a rivalry born of respect, of a deep and abiding understanding of what it meant to be a true warrior. Zara took a deep breath, feeling the fire of determination burning in her veins. The future stretched out before her, filled with the promise of battles yet to come. But she was no longer afraid, no longer consumed by the need to prove herself. For she had found her equal, her perfect match. And together, she knew, they would forge a legend that would endure for generations to come, a testament to the unbreakable spirit of the warrior, to the never-ending quest for self-discovery and self-mastery. The undefeated had fallen. But in her place, something new had risen, something stronger and more powerful than ever before. And as Zara looked to the future, she knew that there was no challenge she could not face, no obstacle she could not overcome. For she was a warrior, and the warrior's path was her destiny. And with Magnus by her side, she knew that anything was possible, that the very stars themselves were within her reach. Revelations and respect. In the days that followed their epic rematch, Zara found herself in a state of deep contemplation. The fight with Magnus had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand, had forced her to confront truths about herself that she had long kept buried. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her unbreakable will and indomitable spirit. But in facing Magnus, she had been forced to confront the limits of that strength, to realize that there were some challenges that could not be overcome through sheer force of will alone. And yet, even in defeat, Zara had found a strange sense of peace, a feeling of rightness that she had never before experienced. For in Magnus, she had found not just a rival, but an equal, a warrior who understood the true nature of the path they had chosen. As she sat in her quarters, staring out at the stars that dotted the inky void of space, Zara knew that she could no longer walk the path of the warrior alone. She needed Magnus, needed his strength and his wisdom, his unwavering commitment to the code of honor that bound them both. And so, with a heavy heart, Zara made her way to Magnus' quarters, her steps echoing in the empty corridors of the space station. She found him seated cross-legged on the floor, his eyes closed in meditation. "Magnus," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have come to speak with you." Magnus opened his eyes, his gaze locking with hers. "Zara," he said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "I have been expecting you." Zara stepped forward, lowering herself to the ground beside him. For a long moment, they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "I have been thinking about our fight," Zara said at last, her voice hesitant. "About what it means for us, for our future." Magnus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "As have I," he said. "And I have come to realize that our paths are inextricably linked, that we are bound together by something deeper than mere rivalry or competition." Zara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of connection and understanding that she had never before experienced. "I feel it too," she said softly. "A bond that goes beyond the arena, beyond the code of the warrior." Magnus reached out, his hand coming to rest on hers. "We are kindred spirits, you and I," he said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "Two warriors, bound by honor and respect, dedicated to the pursuit of excellence." Zara nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I have spent my whole life chasing perfection," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Striving to be the best, to prove myself worthy of the title of undefeated. But in facing you, I have come to realize that true perfection lies not in victory, but in the pursuit itself, in the never-ending quest for self-discovery and self-mastery." Magnus smiled, his eyes filled with a deep understanding. "You have learned a valuable lesson, Zara," he said. One that will serve you well in the battles to come. Zara looked up at him, her eyes shining with a newfound respect. I have learned many things from you, Magnus, she said softly. And I know that I still have much to learn. But one thing is clear to me now. We are stronger together than we could ever be apart. Our rivalry has made us both better, has pushed us to heights we never could have reached alone. Magnus nodded, his expression solemn. Then let us forge a new path together, he said, his voice ringing with conviction. As allies, as friends, as warriors bound by a common purpose. Zara clasped his hand tightly, feeling a sense of rightness settle over her. Together, she said, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. Together, we will face whatever challenges lie ahead, we'll push each other to new heights of skill and power. And together, we will forge a legend that will endure for generations to come. And as they sat there, hand in hand, staring out at the infinite expanse of space, Zara knew that her life had been forever changed. She had found her equal, her perfect match, and together, they would face the future with courage and conviction, secure in the knowledge that they were stronger together than they could ever be apart. The undefeated had fallen. But in her place, something new had risen, something stronger and more powerful than ever before. And as Zara looked to the stars, she knew that the greatest battles of her life still lay ahead, waiting to be fought and won. But she was no longer afraid. For she had Magnus by her side, and together, they were invincible, a force to be reckoned with in the arena and beyond. The warrior's path stretched out before them, filled with the promise of glory and the thrill of battle. And Zara knew that she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, ready to prove herself worthy of the title of warrior once more. But this time, she would not fight for herself alone. She would fight for something greater, something more profound. She would fight for the bond she had forged with Magnus, for the code of honor that bound them both. And in that fight, Zara knew, she would find the true meaning of what it meant to be a warrior, to live a life dedicated to the pursuit of excellence, to the never-ending quest for self-discovery and self-mastery. She took a deep breath, feeling the fire of determination burning in her veins. The future stretched out before her, filled with the promise of battles yet to come. But Zara was ready. She was a warrior, and the warrior's path was her destiny. And with Magnus by her side, she knew that there was no obstacle she could not overcome, no foe she could not vanquish. Together, they would become a legend, a shining example of what it meant to be true warriors, bound by honor and respect, dedicated to the pursuit of perfection. And the galaxy would tremble before their might.